And here we go. Happy Saturday.
Hi.
I was telling everyone how excited I was to see you.
It's always exciting.
I
Always
know.
exciting when we get to chat.
I know. We'll get to this in a second. We've been friends for a while. Friends
It's
for a
true.
little bit. I know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad that we actually finally got some time to do this because I gotten a little off schedule. The idea was to do this like once a month, but now it's turning into
Right.
like a quarterly thing. But it's okay. I can get it on schedule.
Okay. I think now that we're doing the first one, we can kind of make it happen more frequently. So
Yeah.
get off
Yeah.
the
I
ground.
mean, we talked about like in the very beginning, why having, an overseeing physician was important for this. I mean, specifically just to kind of
Mm-hmm.
keep an eye on the movement and the body to
Mm-hmm.
ensure there weren't any concerns along the way. And ultimately, I think, it's awesome to be able to lean on someone, one who I trust and who specializes in orthopedics, which was kind of the specific area that I felt like I needed to be very mindful and watchful over.
Mm-hmm.
So I think
Yes.
this is awesome. For those of you all who don't know Dr. West, Amy, would you be willing to just introduce yourself, tell
Yeah.
everyone a little about your education and professional background, what you're doing now?
Yeah. So my name's Amy West. I am it's called a physiatrist. So doctor of physical medicine and rehabilitation. It's a very small field in medicine that not many people know about, and probably most of people watching haven't heard of before. But we basically focus on function and how diseases affect the body physically. So the how to treat how to treat somebody's disease, and but also how their function in life, and optimizing that. That's kind of our goal. So my subspecialty in that is sports medicine. So I treat a lot of athletes, people with pain, people with different kinds of conditions, including arthritis, things like that. I'm not a surgeon, so I'll put that out right away. I am not a surgeon. I am a non-operative sports medicine physician. So um, that being said, I work with lots of physicians, and I'm happy to recommend surgery when I think it's indicated. So I'm not an anti-surgery person, but I like to explore other ways if possible. Um, and then, beyond that, I've been CrossFitting for about 12 or 13 years now. And, I've been involved in and around the CrossFit community for pretty much that whole time. I sort of discovered CrossFit and discovered my medical specialty at the same time, and they kind of complement each other well. So I've been doing both of those things for a long time.
Is that when
Um,
you found CrossFit is when you were in medical school? I don't think I
yeah,
ever
so I
asked you
was
that.
in so I was in my second year, third between my third and fourth year of medical school, and I did an education degree in between that. So I went to Harvard Medical School, then Harvard Graduate School of Education in between those 2 years. And during that year, I had a lot of more free time than I normally would. And I used to pass this gym every day, CrossFit Fenway, which is no longer there, but has a different name now. But I used to pass all the time. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to see what that's about. So I just went in one day, and that was it. I was kind of sold. Um,
And the rest is
so yeah,
history.
the rest is history. But since that time, so working in and around CrossFit and CrossFit Health and what that is and was and could be, as well as working at the games, the CrossFit Games, as a physician, wheel WOD games. I work a lot with adaptive athletes. That's another thing that sort of coincides with my specialty rather well, focusing on people with different kinds of disabilities and impairments. And then I've worked at Wadapalooza. I'm working at the West Coast Classic next weekend, so
Oh,
that
wow.
should be fun.
That does sound
But
fun.
yeah, so yeah, to go back to
When do you
Carson,
head
really
out?
cool. Thursday night. Yeah. So
Thursday. World traveler
yeah,
you are.
so I am. But yeah, so right now I'm a uh, assistant professor of physical medicine, rehabilitation, and orthopedics. I'm sort of within an orthopedic surgery department in New York at Northwell Health, and I do research there. I'm a clinician. I'm also going to be doing some kind of separate, like, educational things, which I will fill you in on as soon as I have it up and running, something cooking, as far as a way to sort of be able to educate people who aren't local to the area that want, my opinion on things. So that'll be pretty cool.
I love
But
those
yeah,
updates.
yeah. So, and Athena and I, we're homies from back in the day.
And here we are. Okay.
Here we are.
And I can't wait to dive in there because I think a lot of people don't know a lot of this stuff, but it'll be good to hash it out today. But before we get into it, I want to do a better job of giving some shout outs to some 3 entities who have been massively supportive on this journey. Polar's one of them. Polar's got some incredible heart rate sensors and advanced GPS trackers. I've got one of them, so you can go check them out at polar.com. Macro Factor, I've been totally geeking out on this nutrition tracker and this little diet coaching app that uses algorithms. It's the coolest thing I've ever seen. So it kind of adjusts depending on whatever you put in there and how much weight you're losing, what your goals are. So I've been having fun with that little tool the last 2 months. And then Primal Potential, if you guys haven't listened to the Primal Potential podcast, that's with Elizabeth Benton. And she's been really instrumental in this journey. If you haven't started listening to that podcast, just give it a go. I really enjoy it. This last episode, she was talking about mistakes of competency or mistakes of integrity. So in her podcast, she was talking about there's this old saying, like, when you know better, we do better, but do we really? So like when you're making decisions and you know better, how do you break that pattern? So anyway, if you guys want to go visit her podcast, it's Primal Potential. So thank you. Okay. So background. I was sitting here at my desk this morning doing some of these notes for you. And I was laughing because I'm like, how the hell did I meet Amy? And for the life of me, I could not remember. It feels like I've known you my whole life. I could not remember where I met you.
Well, I'll say this: before we actually met in person, we have some mutual friends.
We do.
Jeff Westmoreland, our good buddy Jeff.
Yes, Jeff.
He had certainly spoken very highly of you before, and I believe when I was out when I did the CrossFit podcast with Sevon back, when they had original one at HQ, yep. I think you had either been there or you had just spoken.
That's
so
right.
Like there was like, oh, Athena was here, or she's coming.
There was
some
crossover
and it's
there.
Like, yeah, and it's like I've heard your name and I knew of you, but like we hadn't ever met. But felt like I knew you when I actually met you because I'd heard a lot about you.
I know, same.
Yeah.
But when we actually met on the DEI Council.
We did.
Both of us were.
That was a thing we met on.
Both of us were on the council.
Yeah.
Have you ever? Do people ever ask you about your experience on the council?
No, I mean, a lot of people don't know I was really part of it, to be honest. And
you were like, you were like in the shadows.
Yeah, I mean, my goal in being part of that sort of was to be there as sort of a representative of the medical community and try to help because I think a lot of the initiatives that we had spoken about are sort of actionable in the health space. So, trying to address, there's this, when you talk about empowering people, there's no greater way to do that than to give them control over their own health.
Yeah.
And if we can do that by getting people into affiliates and having them take control of their bodies, that's a pretty powerful thing. So, I had seen it, work well in many places. And certainly also as, someone who works with adaptive athletes quite a bit, I thought, okay, well, here's a council that's, going to have people on it who are all well-intentioned and, and hopefully we can kind of make something happen. So I think that was sort of my kind of initial, motives in getting involved. And then also meeting other people involved. And then, we met and then, so if nothing else, it served that purpose.
We talk about that a lot. You're like, if nothing else good if nothing else really impactful came out of the council, I met some great friends and probably
Yeah.
people that'll be friends for life. So
Yeah.
that
And
was my
I think
takeaway.
yeah. And I think, obviously it got sort of warped and kind of misconstrued and whatever, kind of publicly as to what was happening or how much authority or power or influence we had, which was not much.
We were like
Um,
the oh my gosh, the way that people would talk about us, we were like the Illuminati of
yeah, like that we
CrossFit.
got to decide if things were
The
okay or
weirdest
not.
stuff.
And I
Uh-huh.
yeah, and I think overall, like there's a lot of stuff that maybe the outward messaging wasn't what we were interested in talking about
You
or
know what? I
dealing
don't
with,
think that there
you
was
know?
any messaging, was there?
I don't know, or what maybe the perception, maybe not the messaging, but I think that the perception was that, we were doing certain things or having certain conversations that we weren't having, or I mean, I don't know.
Somehow
I
that
don't
we
know what
had
people
more
thought it
power than
was.
we had, or that
Oh, we
or that
didn't
we
have
got to
any.
be no, or that
No.
somehow we got to be part of decisions that we were not part of
No,
or
but
had
I
any
think
input
also
in.
no, and then
Yeah.
and I and I think maybe I don't know what the intention was that from the beginning. I don't know, but I think we were all like pretty
Neither do
motivated
I.
people who were like well intentioned, and it just kind of like ended
Mhm.
up being a lot of like talking. We did a lot of talking, which was
We
cool,
did
I
a lot of
guess.
talking.
A lot of
We had
talking.
some good conversations. Some of
Yeah,
them were
we did.
interesting. Well,
Yeah. So that happened.
it was great.
So
Don't
but
you were like, it was great. It was a fabulous
yeah,
experience.
listen, it was an experience. It was, interesting too because the company was going through so many changes at the time. So we sort of had a little bit of an
It
insight
really
into what was going
was.
on, and like who was doing what and where and
Sort
how.
of.
We kind of got a little taste of that, a
Yeah.
little taste of that.
A
So
little bit.
again, ended up meeting a lot of really great people. And
Mhm.
those relationships have kind of gone on to do other things that I think ultimately kind of bring back to the original reason why I got involved
Mhm.
to begin with. So like here we are
Yeah.
talking about health related things as it relates to specific populations of people, and like that's what we're doing, right? I
There you
guess
go.
it served its purpose, right? And I've had
It
other
did.
conversations with like Jen over CrossFit Garden City, and Mason I've run into at her at different events. So it's like we all end up. Um,
Jen's great.
so I guess ultimately it served the purpose, but like sort of on its own, not through the formal organization,
Mhm.
which I think is
Yeah.
a sort of a CrossFit theme, if you will.
Uh, yes, I agree.
So,
Council, I you know what? I'm just gonna piggyback on what you said. I think if anything, there was some positive connections. And you know what? I wouldn't have these check-ins with you without it. So
there you go.
hooray.
So there you go.
So yeah, so let's talk about how we talked about teaming up. So
Yeah.
um what was the like I know what it was, but why did we feel at the time like this? First of all, this would be a good idea. I think because um I think there's a lot of noise in the space about whether or not somebody can accomplish some really big things doing it this way through diet, nutrition, not taking shots, not doing anything else. So that there was one aspect, but I think the other aspect is can I stay safe through the whole year and go through this entire year without injury?
Yeah.
And I think people thought that that was going to be too hard. Like, no, she's going to get hurt. Started with Hiller, obviously. Hiller's going to make her do all these things that, she's going to die. So I think there were some concerns about his training, but I mean, so far so good, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's there's a lot of fear in general around intensity. There's fear around um, hard work in like the exercise space as far as when it comes to like
Mm-hmm.
losing weight or
Yeah.
when it comes people they see CrossFit and that kind of stuff is like crazy. That's for that's for certain people, it's not for other people. And
Yeah.
So one is sort of dispelling that and saying like, okay, we're going to be okay here. And then also just to
Mhm.
do it safely. I mean, obviously you can't hurt yourself doing stuff, and if you have
I
any
mean,
medical history and stuff, you have to be smart about it, which I don't question that you would be, but things pop up, or stuff happens, then at least it's
I
like,
live in
okay,
Minnesota.
well,
I've hurt myself walking to the mailbox, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
So
I slipped on the ice
right,
multitude of times and it hurt myself worse than
there
I
you go.
ever risked in
Yeah,
CrossFit.
right.
Shit.
So I mean, and I think in general, you're not going to find too many physicians saying like, yeah, do this, this is a good idea, which is crazy to me for many reasons. But
And I'm gonna
there's
ask you
only
about
a
that
handful
too.
of us, I think. Yeah, I think there's only a small handful of us that really are proponents of it, but who aren't
Yeah.
going to just sort of be like, well, maybe not that. You should exercise, but don't do that kind of thing. I think that's more of the general kind of attitude now is like, well, that's crazy, but
Mhm.
so
It is.
you know,
Okay.
that's what you
So
want to hear. I'm not going to tell you that. That's for sure. That's not coming from my mouth. So
here's what I do want to hear.
yeah.
So one of the reasons that I wanted people to be able to listen to this, because we've had multiple conversations on it, but I thought it might be helpful
Hmm.
for everyone else, is that I think so. Let's rewind.
Hmm.
When the opportunity kind of presented itself to do this thing this year, and one of the reasons that I wanted a movement coach to begin with on the movement side was it's not that I can't do classes. I know your buddy Sean likes to talk about that stuff. Athena needed one-on-one. No, I'm fully capable of doing group classes. That wasn't the problem. The problem was is that I was coming back from knee replacements, and
Hmm.
the recovery on that, because of what they did, it wasn't just two TKRs, two total knee replacements. They did a Blount's correction. So they cut into my tibia on one side too. So when I was coming
Hmm.
back to CrossFit, like that recovery time was hellacious. Like there's nothing to describe the recovery on that. It was murder. But because of that, I tend to overscale. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like I'm
Yeah.
very, like I'm a coach, I can do this myself. And I tried to talk myself through that, but I tend to be a little bit overly cautious. And the reason why I'm overly cautious, and this is what I wanted to talk to you about, was
Hmm.
when they send you home from having knee replacements, like there's this surgical team and they're in front of you and they're like,
Hmm.
don't run, no running, no jumping,
Hmm.
don't do anything strenuous. Like this was some really drilled down shit when you're going through all the recovery. You're like, they're literally telling you this when you're in the bed. When you leave here,
Hmm.
you will not ever do these things again.
Yeah.
And then you're in physical therapy and they're making you go up and down the stairs and they've got you tied to this little belt so you don't fall, right? And they're telling you this stuff. No running, no jumping. Here's everything that you're never going to be able to do again.
Hmm.
So my question to you is, it
Hmm.
seems like sometimes that the feedback from the surgeons seems contradictory. They say, don't run, don't do box jumps.
Yeah.
Like, what I want
Hmm.
to know is like, what is fact and what is fiction? What do we really know? Should you,
Huh.
shouldn't you? Like, I feel like there's so much shit out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a bit of a complicated answer, but I'll say this. I'll just start by like putting out the general
Yeah.
disclaimer that I I am not a surgeon. One.
Hmm.
Two, if someone has been given instructions by their surgeon, I am in no way telling them to ignore those instructions. Anytime you have been given instructions by a surgeon, discuss with that person what your concerns are and if you want to change, you want to veer off that path. So like
Right.
just putting that out there in the universe.
It's a disclaimer.
Two,
Amy's not saying
disclaimer,
ignore your
right?
surgeon. Right.
Right, exactly. And there is some truth in those statements, but you have to also first understand that one is, in general, a lot of post-surgical instructions are kind of, you know, they want to protect their work, right? So, you don't want to do anything that could jeopardize the integrity of the implants. So, any high impact activity potentially could threaten that. That being said, the
Yeah.
data on that is actually not great. There's not a lot. Frankly,
When you
there's not.
say that,
There
what
are
do you
not.
mean?
There's so there aren't many studies that study high impact activity on knee replacements and the long term outcomes. There just aren't. Partially
I wonder
because people
why.
are being advised. Partially people are just being advised don't do it, so they don't.
Not
So
to do
therefore,
it,
they're
so
not
there's nothing
studied.
to study.
Right? So that's part of it. 2, the technology has changed. I mean, knee replacements, what they were made of 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it's different now. So how those things take load, if you will, bear
Mhm.
load is different than they even were a few years ago. So a lot of the recommendations are not based on actual data about the prosthesis, but rather expert opinion. There's a they poll 150 surgeons who are expert in this and say, what are your thoughts? What do you think about this?
Yeah.
And that tends to be the overriding recommendation, right? There's been some interesting studies about that, and even now, the opinions are changing about running, for example. There was a study recently that said something upwards of 60% now of surgeons would say, like, it's of this expert panel
Yeah.
said, okay, running's okay. Running is okay, or jogging's okay, and like running on a treadmill's okay. So we're now like more than half are saying, well, that's okay. But there are caveats to all these things. There's nuance to all of these recommendations as well. Things I'm going to say, things that they say. So it's not like a blanket statement. Like everyone can just go run as much as they want. Like no one's saying that. But the fear aspect of it, I think, is part of the reason why people don't even try. But it's a bit of a complicated thing because a lot of factors go into um, you know the the stress on the implant, and that includes body weight, that includes form. So there have been some studies on like hip implants and how they do with high impact activity, and one of the things that was shown to prevent or to not show to cause earlier reimplantation was like people land like doing things with improper form, running with improper form, landing in improper form. So um, after having, a replaced joint, if you've never run before or you've never jumped before, you really have to look into how to do those things safely before jumping into it, literally, right? Or trying to take on any high volume of that. Um, if you have to, like do similar to how you're approaching it, if those are things that you're really interested in doing or want to continue doing, then it's a matter of finding help and guidance in those movements and how to do them safely, how to do them well, and also a volume issue. You don't want to be jumping every day, multiple reps every day.
Right.
Maybe you do it a few times a week, right? So it's not a blanket like you can't do this, you can do this. It's like, well, you can do this, but here's how to do it well. Here's how
Mhm.
not to do it. And and if it's something that's important to you to do, then why is that important to you? And then we could figure out a way to get there within reason, right? So
Yeah.
it's not just a so it means the ability to jump and land is actually directly related with mortality, your likelihood of dying. So, so training that movement is actually not a bad thing. Should you be jumping off of 30-inch boxes? No, probably not, right? And then also there's also the risk of trauma, like just falling. So obviously if you're jumping off a height where you have a risk at falling and hurting yourself from the fall, that's a whole other problem. So you don't want that.
Mhm.
But if I think anyone who's watched the video of you doing the box jump and the importance
Yes,
of you being
which
able to do that versus
yeah.
a recommendation that, hey, if you keep doing that, maybe in 20 years you're going to need that joint replaced again. Like, let's
I mean,
like
here
think about that, right? Let's break that down and say, okay, so there's nuance to that. That it's a risk. It's also risk benefit, right? So, do you want to live the next 20 years of your life, for example, not ever practicing a jump because maybe you'll have to replace that joint a little earlier, or do you want to try it, improve your self esteem, improve your ability to function, improve your ability to prevent from falling when you slip on the ice in Minnesota, and then there is a smaller risk that that joint fails before it's supposed to, but actually we haven't proven that it can. So
that that video caused that video of the box jump although it was highly celebrated, it was also highly criticized. And
Well, isn't
my
that the internet?
DMs,
Welcome to the internet, right?
you know what I mean? Like my DMs blew up because and some of the comments, this is some of the stuff that I wanted to talk to you about today, because we've talked about this
Yeah.
kind of through the journey. And there's been
Mhm.
times when I've reached out to you
Yeah.
being like, hey, Amy, I don't want this to be
Yeah.
a surprise, but like getting the box jump was important to me. It was just
Mhm.
there was no reason other than it was just like, I did it before surgery, and that was going to be the mark for me. Like, hey, I've been able to get past this. And that's all it was. But the criticism was, Athena, you're a CrossFit coach. You understand like what goes into joint replacements. Why would you ever put yourself out there to do those jumps and encourage people that have had joint replacements to go do these things? Because you're told when you leave there, don't run, don't jump. I'm
Mhm.
like, what am I supposed to do? Like, sit on the couch? And here's the thing, because those joint
Yeah.
replacements were done so young, I mean, they told me when I left there anyway that, hey, you might get 20 years. That's best case scenario. So I
Right.
already know that they're going to have to be replaced. So what am I going to save? 6 months? And by the
Well,
time
yeah,
that,
and that's, you know, that's the idea, right? It's like
I mean, yes, you
it
want them to
there's a
last as long
balance,
as
right?
possible.
Right. But, it's a balance thing. It's
Yes.
a, as far as like figuring out, yes, attempting a box jump in a safe environment on a low, soft surface versus just never doing that ever again,
Right.
you know? So, and that's it's a personal choice too, right? And you've accepted the risks of that.
Yes.
But I would argue that not doing that in that way, in that specific way, when those specific precautions for your specific situation, would be more harmful than just saying, "Oh, I'll just never do that again." Like that. If you, I just don't. There's risk benefit to it that's individual to each person. But if you
Agree.
and and if, when you put, and also understanding when you put surgeons in, any medical professional to make a recommendation, a blanket statement to everybody, they're going to choose the safest, lowest lowest common denominator blanket statement, because that this way that you're covered, right?
So
So
here's
that's
something that I
also
said
coming.
a lot.
That's just we have to do, right?
Yeah, I get it. Here's this. I mean, here's how I was responding to people was,
Mhm.
there's a difference between trying to get that one jump and being like, I just want to get to this level, and throwing in box jumps and the high impact stuff at every single workout, every single day. Like, that's not
Right,
what's happening. Like, I
right.
want to be
There you
responsible.
go.
Like, is this something in good conscience, knowing the directions that I was given? Is this something that I would recommend on an everyday thing? No, I wouldn't, to
Exactly.
anybody.
Exactly. And that's the thing, right? It's like we're not saying like do 30 box jumps for time every day. That's a different story. No one's saying that, right? So
Right.
um it's
Does
a
that
it's
make
a
a
very
difference?
specific thing. Yes,
Do you think
yeah,
that makes a
absolutely.
difference?
Well, yeah, I mean there's impact and there's impact. So although we don't have a lot of data as far as like people doing high impact stuff, one you can imagine that. So when you jump, so on your every pound on your body is like 4 pound, like times 4 pounds of pressure on your knee. So
Right.
when you jump, it's like it can be 9 times as much pressure on your knees, right? So you have to be mindful of that when you're doing things like running and jumping, that there's more pressure going through those prostheses, which over time one would postulate that could have a negative effect. That being said, it's a balance, right? There's there's doing tons of running, there's doing none at all. And where's the sweet spot for you, and what makes sense for you, and how can you do those things safely? I mean, I think that's kind of where we keep coming back to is like, okay, like what makes sense for you in your specific situation, and how can we do that in the safest way possible and still get you to that goal, but, being safe about it, don't and that's part of it that can be a little tricky for people,
Couldn't we
and I get
argue
that, but
couldn't we argue that one of the benefits about CrossFit is that it is constantly varied? We're not doing these things every day, all day. We're
of course
doing
not,
different
yeah.
things all the time. And to
Mhm.
me, I see just the foundation of our methodology. One of the greatest pros in this is that this isn't something that we're doing every day. Sometimes we will be.
Yeah, and also, you have to also look at the benefit of doing these types of things, and I'm not just talking about box jumping, but, um, impact on
Yeah.
loading your bones as far as bone density concerns, which are also a huge problem. Um, the
Yep.
improvements that you see in metabolic health, which influence your musculoskeletal health tremendously, as well as everything else in your body. So, you
Hmm.
have to, in order to improve those things, these types of exercises can help with that. And again, it's a risk benefit, right? And just being able to do those in a safe manner and using, being smart about it. It's not necessarily like nobody should do this ever, but there's a line there.
Are we talking about the same type of concerns that we would like running or jumping if we were talking about like loading up the barbell? So like what happens when Athena starts going for her, 300 plus deadlifts? What then? Is that or is it going to be the same type of load concerns?
It's not the same type of load concern as like a jump in a land because it's a different kind of mechanism. Although you can certainly load your joints. If you did like
That
a
way too.
squat, for example. Yeah, but it's a little different. It's a little bit of a different mechanism. But again, I mean,
Hmm.
it's all kind of within safe parameters. You can do them. So you just might have to adjust what it looks like, or adjust the load or the frequency. And anyone who's I'd say this if you're um, concerned about, or if questions about, what people can do on knee replacements, I'd say look at Kelly Starrett's stuff. So Kelly's he's he's a good friend of mine, and the things he does on his replaced knee. I mean, it's crazy. But he's like he's been sort of like redefining like what's possible to do on a knee replacement, and all of his surgeons were like, "We can't believe you're doing this stuff." But he was, in very good shape going into his procedure, and he's obviously like has great mobility and all that, but he's doing all kinds of things on a knee replacement that they told me you'd never be able to do. He's
That's
very
the same
smart
thing they
about how he
told me.
trains.
Yeah.
Right, and he's very smart about how he trains, and, the average person can't necessarily look at what he's doing and say, "Yeah, I'm gonna go do that." But it's showing
Right.
what's possible, right? And also, if you're taking the right precautions and are consulting with people who know what they're talking about, then you can do those things safely. Um,
So to some people, like some of these people that were reaching out in my DMs were like in the medical community,
mhm.
and they believed that showing the box jump with someone that had two knee replacements was irresponsible. Like, how do you respond to
Okay.
that? What would you say? Do you feel like it was irresponsible?
Personally, I don't. Um, I think it's anything you put out on the internet, people can interpret all kinds of ways. That's the problem. That it
Sure.
reaches a lot of people, but a lot of people can misinterpret it or kind of assume things that aren't true about it. There's always that problem when you put stuff out on the internet. I think you've been pretty open about your journey and your health and kind of what you're doing and who's guiding you. Um,
Mhm.
So I don't. I think to me it's inspirational to see that. Um, but if you were posting videos of you like doing tons of box jumps every day and telling people that's what they need to be doing, then it's like I don't think that's a good idea. You know?
That would be a different story, right? That's what I thought
Yeah.
too. I'm like, you mean to tell me that
Again,
one PR on a box jump is somehow like I'm being an irresponsible
yeah.
coach? Come on.
Yeah, I there again, it's like nuance. There's degrees of this, and there are certain things that are reckless, that you could have shown that I would have said that's not a great idea. Um, but I think in this setting with what's been going on, you know, and again, it's always with the caveat of like, okay, if you are if you don't want to do that, then don't do it.
Yeah.
So anyone who sees that and thinks that's crazy, I'm not doing it. Okay, great, don't do it. Two, um, don't defy recommendations of your surgeon, but I think you have the right to converse with them and ask them questions.
Too late.
Well, I'm not talking about you, but in general, like, but to say like, I want to do this, or don't, or this is what I want to do. Hey, how do I get to that point? Or
I
why
wanted to be able to get
if I shouldn't
one.
do it, why can't I do it? Yeah, yeah, or like, why can't I do this, or how can I go about this more safely, or what does the data show about people in my situation? Frankly, there isn't much, but if that's all,
Here's, I mean, I think you're right. I think well, one, I wonder how many people, how many people that have TKRs go in there and be like, hey, I want to do all this stuff. I want to be able to run and jump and do all these things. Like, how many actually really do that?
right. And what I see, what kind of makes me sad about it is that I see a lot of people, before, who are pretty active people, and for whatever reason, need to have this procedure
And then they
done, have,
become totally inactive.
right, they become inactive, or they delay getting the procedure done for years, and they're miserable, and they're just declining in function for years because they're told once they get that done, they're not gonna be able to do all these things that they wanna do. So
Because
therefore,
they
they're just
scare
gonna
the shit
suffer.
out of you, that's why. Yeah,
Right,
they
and
scare the
therefore
crap out of
they
you.
just right, and then they just end up suffering for, 2, 3 years of hobbling around and trying to push
Yeah.
through the pain that they're in because they said, "Well, if I get that knee replacement, I'm done." And so it's a lot of dispelling myths about that. um
Well, in their
and it's a
defense,
shame,
that's essentially what they tell you. You're done. You're gonna be
right? And
able
I think that's
to
a
walk around your neighborhood, and that's about it.
yeah, and I think that's unfortunate that that's the message. But again, it's like the blanket recommendation is always down here. They're not going to say, well, not in your case because you do this and this. It's like this is one size fits all a little bit, um, because that's just to protect themselves. Even that's kind of what they. And a lot of the rhetoric in orthopedic space is that yeah, these things will break down, have an accelerated breakdown if you do this. Um, but again, it's not like if you attempt a single box jump on a small soft box, that, that's very different than the other things we were talking about.
Well, like I said, I felt like I could hurt myself worse taking that spill in the driveway. Like I couldn't walk for 3 days after
Yeah,
that, and it was worse than
yeah,
anything that I've ever done in CrossFit. Like I
right.
literally
And
can't
then
remember any time where I had an injury that I could pinpoint and say this happened at CrossFit. Not in all the years I've been
yeah,
doing CrossFit.
yeah, and then I'll say this: like your ability to control your body in that box jump and learning that motor pattern will serve you well when you are walking on the ice, right? Or if something else, you trip and you need to catch yourself, or right. So by training that motor pattern, here are all the benefits of it, including the stability, the motor control, the balance, the traversing a step, being able, feeling good about yourself. Or don't do it because in 20 years you might degrade your prosthesis. I mean, okay, and if those two, weigh those two things for yourself and say, what am I choosing here, and know the consequences of that.
You
Uh,
know what? Here's how I saw it. I saw it like I already know that these have a maximum of 20 years. So it's basically like I took it as this is how I interpreted it. You're going to get 20 years max. So in my brain, I was like, well, let's make it the best 20 years ever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, okay, if I shave a year off
Mhm.
because I wanted a box jump, or I wanted to learn how to control, like, people don't understand, like, when you have this, you're learning how to do everything all over again. Like, you have to learn
Mhm.
how to walk again. And I think the thing that I have the hardest time explaining to people is that, like, no, you can't feel like the the prosthesis. I have a hard time with that
Mhm.
word, prosthesis. You can't feel it, but at the same time, it does feel foreign. So when you're doing something like running, it's a very awkward, that land part can get very awkward, and it's hard to explain, but it's not the same. Maybe it is
Mhm.
for some people, but it certainly is not on me. And so when your foot goes down and the ball of your foot lands in that second, or a half a fraction a second, it can get very unstable for a second. And so it's teaching yourself how to, that's the most important part to me, is teaching myself how to control that balance. Because when you're out there
Yeah,
and you get on the ice, or it's bad weather, like, this is why you need to learn how to do those things to live longer. That's
exactly.
how I see
Yeah,
it.
and that's right, and that's kind of, that's what I'm getting at, is that, like, there are reasons that training those movements is a good thing. Now, training them in excess, or, going overboard with that, and where that line is different for everybody. Yes, that's a bad thing. You don't wanna be doing extra running necessarily, but you need to say to never run again. There's there's somewhere in between those 2 statements where you can safely be.
Okay, so you're familiar with the CAP. Are you familiar with CrossFit affiliate programming, or
I
at
mean, I
least
know of
essentially
it.
what you get out
I
of,
mean, I
right?
know of it.
I think
I know of it. Yeah, yeah.
any of the programs with the
Mhm.
basis that this is constantly varied, would you say that it was in excess?
Not that I've seen.
Not that I've seen either.
Yeah, and, that being said too, another thing that's, we talk a lot about now, like, longevity medicine, and sort of not just living long, but living well. And the same thing applies to a prosthetic joint, right? I mean, it's lifespan versus, like, health span. So the integrity of that joint lasting X amount of years, but you're not particularly functioning well, or not doing things you enjoy for those 20 years, versus it lasts, maybe it lasts less time, but you're engaging in things that really bring you joy and
Quality of
also
life
help
is 10
you
times
prevent from getting
better.
injured.
Exactly.
Okay. So I mean, need I say more? Like, and maybe that's for you, and for you being able to do those things is what is making that better for you. Maybe for someone down the street with double knee replacements, they don't ever want to jump on a box, and you know what? They never should then. If that's not what they're into, and it's not something they're concerned with ever having to do, and they don't find it fun, and they don't see the benefit, okay, then don't do it.
But irresponsible is not a word that you would use.
Personally, I would not.
See? There we go. I feel validated.
Yeah, well,
I'm like, I'm serious. I'm shocked at how many of those I got. Well, I'm not shocked. I want to be shocked, but I'm not.
you know,
I get the
and I think
weirdest
it all
shit
comes
in my
from.
inbox.
I mean, I'm sure you do, but I think it comes from a good place, and also comes maybe from a fearful place. I don't know, but
I mean,
and
is
it's
it?
it's not a
Sometimes I
it's not a one
wonder,
size fits all thing. It's not a one size fits all thing. So maybe for that person, it's not for them. Okay.
with as much as, I mean, I look at, well, it was a little different when I was on Hiller's movement. I don't even know how to talk about it because I don't even know what it was. But since I've been back on, like, standard CrossFit programming and following CAP, for instance, let's take that because it's easier to talk about. It's so different all the time that I don't even remember the last time. I mean, it's been probably at least a couple weeks since there was any kind of, like, box jumps. And then before that, there might be a running thing once a week, like it's so
Mhm.
infrequent when you look at it that I'm like, I never saw it as a concern. It never once even occurred to me like, oh, well, except the other day. But again, you monitor these things. So the other day there was a pretty high volume of like jumping pull-ups. Again, it's still the jumping movement. Yes, you're holding onto the bar, but your knees are still taking the impact when you land. And the
Mhm.
workout was 21:15:9. When you think about it, like that's a lot of jumps. And so we were getting down to I was
Mhm.
getting down to like the last 5, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to slow these down because the knees they're saying like it's probably too much. But like I can do that and self-regulate and be like, I know when they're saying I'm uncomfortable and I know when to stop.
Right, and
What's not
that's
responsible
getting
about that?
right, and I think, either some people aren't able to do that for themselves, or they don't
Maybe
wanna do
so.
that themselves, or, some people are, not equipped for whatever reason, to do it, so, I think and a lot of things with CrossFit, it's like you have to have a sensor inside yourself to say, like, "This
You
doesn't
do.
feel good for me," or "I don't like this," or "This is making me uncomfortable," and then you say, "Okay, I'll adjust that." I mean, I'll say this, so because I'm guilty of it myself, I do it all the time. But, I was, like, teaching myself how to do pullovers, when you kinda flip your
Oh, yeah,
butt
yeah,
around the
yeah.
bar and spin around. And, I'll say this, I am not the most gifted gymnast in the world. I'm not a natural gymnast by any means. So I was, messing around with that, a few months ago,
I don't know,
and,
those
and I
pictures of
had
yours make you look like a pretty phenomenal
so
gymnast.
so in
Those ring
brief
pictures
moments
are pretty amazing.
in brief moments it happens, but,
If anybody hasn't seen Amy's
yeah.
infamous ring pictures on her Instagram, you should go check them out because they are
Oh,
lovely.
yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
It's photography, that's I'll give that credit to the photographer.
They're awesome.
But, I was teaching myself how to do that, and I didn't have a plan to do it. I just was like, "Oh, let me try this," and I was, like,
Okay.
doing, like it was started with, like, a strict pull-up, and I was pulling myself up and, like, trying to throw my butt around, and eventually I figured it out. But I did that for, I don't know, probably I was trying to do that almost an hour, do that and other things, but pulling myself, doing a strict pull on the bar, and then flipping around and looking like an idiot. But,
Yeah.
um, and at the end of it, I was like, "Oh god, my elbow." Like, I basically gave myself some medial epicondylitis from all the gripping and pulling with this arm. And I look at it and I was like, that was kind of a dummy move on my part, because I went to learn a movement with no plan and no real, like, drill or anything. And I just was, like, overdoing it for, like, an hour of just spinning around on a bar. And then I ended up hurting myself doing it. And I said, "Okay, well, you know what?" And that's it, sort of what I'm saying, it sort of transfers to this, right? You wanna do a box jump, you have to have a plan in place. You have to make sure you're doing it safely. You have to give yourself a sort of a time limit and an intensity limit, and and you could do it, but you have to be smart about it, because then you might hurt yourself, or you might end up causing damage to something. Quite
That
happened
was
to my arm.
one good
So,
that was one really good parameter that
mhm,
um Hiller put in place when I was learning these. I don't want to call them advanced movements. They were just advanced movements for me. But when I was working on
mhm,
the lunge or I was working on the box jump, right now we're working on getting a longer stride. So,
mhm,
a longer sprint, so like we started with 100 meters. Now we're working up to the 200 meters without stopping. But one of the things that he put in place, which I did not understand when he did it, but looking back, it was genius, really. And that was he put a 5-minute time cap. 5 minutes was all I got to practice if I went out there to do it. So he was anticipating she's going to want to work on the hard thing every day, which I do. And that is exactly
right,
what I do.
right,
But
right,
he limited it to 5 minutes. And that's like, if you don't get it in that 5-minute period, you're done for the day. That's it. That's all you get. And it was probably one of the best takeaways that I took out of that, was because it's so focused and it's intentful. And there's very low risk because you're not allowed, like you're not going to have overuse problems like you had that day. Like
Right.
freaking working on it for an hour and a half or whatever, however long you did.
Right. Right. And again, like that's sort of the theme here is like I was telling you before we started, like training with intention and having a plan.
Yeah. What did you say?
Much
What did you say before I hit
well,
record? Because I'd love for people
so I
to hear
said
that. I thought it was
yes.
awesome.
Oh, I said you had inspired me to to train with intention. So to kind of there's been things in CrossFit that for example, that and
Mhm.
other things in my life that I want to do and whatever that I've said, oh yeah, I'm going to do that, or I want to learn how to do better at that, or I just wasn't good at, and I said, oh well, and I said, well, let me intentionally take steps to improve on those things. So, like working with different coaches and, working with people to help get you to goals and tracking that, recording progress and having a plan. I think that also gives people, I mean, in general, give people a sense of control, like, oh, I can actually change this or do something about it. And you're like, okay, I'm going to intentionally try to do this, and this is how I'm going to get there. So, I've taken on
Sometimes, like,
some of that.
that's so cool, though. Obviously, you can't control speed. I don't. This month was probably the slowest month I've had in terms of like weight loss, but something really cool happened. And we're going to start
Hmm.
talking about these on our check-ins, but we
Yeah.
started doing the scans, like what is that other one called that I have, Amy, that I always forget the name of it?
DEXA scan?
The
The
DEXA
DEXA
scan.
scan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did a DEXA at month 1, and then we did a DEXA at month 3, and then coming up at the end of June will be the 3rd one. But we do these in
Mhm.
bodies every month, and there's a little score on the
Mhm.
DEXA, or sorry, on the in body when I started, and I don't even know what the score is. It just says total score that reflects the evaluation of body composition. So the first time that I did one of these, it was like a 63.
Mhm.
And now the total in body score is a 49. So every single time that I've done one of these, the score gets better and better.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so the months that I might not necessarily be seeing the greatest progress on the scale, it's like you can look at this and be like, composition is changing. Like, this is the greatest thing ever. Some of it is
Yeah, so
redistributing. Like, something really
that's
interesting
super
happened
important.
today. Yeah. Like, here's something really interesting, Amy. So
Mhm.
my thigh got bigger. We measured it twice. Why would that happen?
Mhm. Mhm.
Is it just the body's redistributing muscle? Is that how it works?
I
Like,
would
I'm
so
not
yeah, I
surprised
mean,
about the thighs with all the damn
my
LSD
guess
I've
is
been
that
doing.
your my guess is that your muscle mass in your thighs and hips and stuff has gone way up, or at least like,
That's
gone up.
that's what it's showing. It went up in 2 different places. I'm like, why did my inches go up? But that's why.
Those are the
But
gains, girl. That's what
yes.
those are.
So, but when you look at these, it's like this is telling you, oh, body fat
And that's
percentage is going
so
down, muscle percentages are going up.
yeah, so this is super important. As far as just like from a health standpoint, and especially when
Yeah.
tracking weight loss or anything really, is
Yeah.
going beyond weight and going on beyond BMI, even because BMI has a lot of flaws in the measurement. And one thing so things to pay attention to are muscle mass. That's super important because that will fluctuate as you become more fit. Your muscle mass can increase
Yeah.
as your fat is decreasing, but your weight might not overall change very much. Same
Yep.
with measurements, like you're noticing. And then, muscle mass percentage is associated with all kinds of positive health outcomes as you increase your muscle mass. So that's super important. And then looking at, I don't know if that in body gives you a visceral fat measurement. DEXA scans usually do. Visceral
There's so
fat,
much
that's super important. Some of the
there's so
newer
much
in bodies give
data.
that. Some of the older ones do not. Um,
Where would I
and the
find it?
visceral it's one of the, I don't know where on that printout it would be, but there's a number called visceral. Not every in-body does it, so it might not even be on there. But visceral fat, that's like all the fat around your organs, and that's the kind of the most deadly form of fat, you could say. So even people who are super skinny who have a lot of visceral fat usually are not very metabolically healthy, and that's a problem.
There's a dry
So
lean mass and then a
mhm,
body fat mass. So
that
those are the
InBody might
numbers
not
that
give
I'm
you that.
looking at.
That might not give you that
Visceral.
score. A DEXA scan should, but that might
I
not.
get it.
Some InBodies do, but some don't. But that's a super important number to track as well, because obviously losing fat in general, but the visceral fat is really important to track and to try to decrease as much as possible, because the fat around your organs, that's really kind of the dangerous stuff. And then, looking at, muscle mass, visceral fat, and bone density is another one. So, um, and I'm not sure, I forgot how the InBody kind of outputs that, but bone density, again, with the DEXA scan, they'll show you that. And that's super important too, because you want strongest bones possible. And I kind of always push people to be, it's usually given in a score, like a standard deviation, positive or negative from the mean, the average or whatever. But I always
Oh, there
try to
is a
encourage people to
visceral
be on the.
fat level. It's right here.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay,
Okay.
great.
So it is on here. So I
Okay.
think that this stuff, I think on our next check-ins, like this is what I want to
Mhm.
start talking about, because this is where it's showing up. And I'm like, this is
Mhm.
tangible, regardless of whatever happens on the scale that month. Like this is some
Right.
tangible stuff. And this is where I
And it's
geek out.
important. It's
It
important. The
is.
bone like the bone density, the skeletal, the bone density, muscle mass, the visceral fat, tracking those things. And also, I mean, people will say like, oh, well, InBodies aren't that accurate. But what's important with InBodies, if you're going to be comparing them, is the trend. So even if the number is a little bit off, because sometimes InBodies are influenced by like your hydration, they're influenced by lots of things where they cannot necessarily be precise. But the trend is what you want to look at with those. And that's
When I
also
look at
why
the,
in your doctor's office, you're not going to necessarily get that information. They'll just do a weight and say, X, and it's like, okay,
yeah,
that's kind of useless. Yeah.
what I look at isn't necessarily like every single digit, knowing that some of these are probably off. But what I do is I look at the first one compared to like the one that I just did, and the
Hmm. Right. Right.
trend
And
is
that's
down.
kind of,
That's
let's
where
look at the
that's what we
trends.
want.
Yeah. Yes,
Exactly.
that is what we,
Anyway,
that is what we want. Yeah.
we'll dive more into those later,
Oh
but
yeah. I love me an in-body scan. I love those.
I like
I
the
tried to get one for
DEXA.
my office. The
I
Dex is
want
more
one
accurate.
so bad. Oh
What
yeah.
a Dex. I mean, the Dexys
I
are more
felt
accurate
like,
and everything, but they're much harder to obtain. Yeah.
well, you got to make an appointment for that, and then you got to
It's radiation too,
you got to
so
lay down in that machine, and
yeah, it's radiation. The InBody is a good kind of quick substitute without the radiation, much more accessible. So I'm trying to convince like the head of my department to like, we need one in our office. And they're like, why do you need one in an orthopedic office? I'm like, if this thing would blow people's minds as far as like showing people some of those metrics, I think they'd really be shocked. I think
it's
that, I
neat.
mean, it's sometimes it's a slap in the face for people really, which is sometimes what they need, but
I really geek out on the
what,
sprint
maybe
on
one day.
spiral.
Yeah.
There's a come on, Amy. There's a selfish reason you want that in body in the orthopedics
I mean,
department.
also because then I have unlimited access to it. That'd be great. But the main thing is like it's funny because I was hanging out with a few friends at their CrossFit gym, the one that they go to, and I was like by the door I saw there's an InBody scan there, and I was like, you guys have an InBody here? Like, and they're like, yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm like, have you ever been on one of those? And they're like, no. So then I like 10 people got on it right after and measured, and they were all like their minds were blown, and these were all like active CrossFitting people. And they're like, this gives me more information than anything I've ever gotten from my doctor. And I was like, probably, but
Truly,
they were all like, and then they were all like, comparing and
if
whatever.
you guys have an in
But
body at
you
your
know,
gym, take advantage of it. It's awesome what
yeah,
you
for
learn.
sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's sometimes a rude awakening for some, which I think is sometimes what people need to kind of make
Hmm.
steps, but it's a good way to track. Cause I think weight is certainly not the only metric to use, and BMI is loaded with flaws and misinterpretations and stuff. So I think that's where something like this comes in.
I love it. Well, thank you for that hour flew by the way. Thank you for
I
validating
know.
me. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, they're gonna come from me now. You know that, right?
It's not going to stop me from posting more of those videos though, because I love getting, I love those little, that's what fuels me. And that's what makes my heart sing. So I'm just going to keep on doing them. If it shaves a year off, whatever, they're going to have to be
You put a little
replaced
disclaimer in
anyway.
there, and
That's what I did. I was like, I'm not recommending
personal
this.
choice.
It's just personal. It's just a personal goal. So hallelujah.
There you go.
Anyway.
And there you go.
Well, I'll look forward to our next check-in. Lovely to see you as always.
As always a pleasure.
When do I get to see you?
I don't know. We'll see what was the next thing we're all going to be at.
No. Have to keep me in the loop.
We'll of course.
I'm sure I'll text you tomorrow.
yeah, exactly.
I'll be talking to you tomorrow anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thanks, girl. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend.
Same to you.
Tell your little buddy I said hello. Your little four-legged buddy.
I will. Macho says hi.
Macho. See you later.
Later.